Hi, everybody. Welcome back to this week's News Digest from Masters of Supply Chain. I'm John Church, and I'm joined today by Tony Milando. Tony has a background across both finance and supply chain leadership. A lot of his career at Black & Decker, DeWalt, Black & Decker, Stanley, DeWalt, et cetera. And most recently in incarnation as a supply chain leader at Xylem, the sustainable water solutions company. Tony, thanks for joining me today. It's certainly interesting times that we're living in.
My pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, John. And no, there's absolutely, it's not even week by week or day by day or hour by hour anymore. It's tweet by tweet.
For sure. And, we've talked a little bit about this idea of uncertainty. And, there's are you charging ahead doing stuff? Are you spending all your time answering the emails from your board members who are wondering what the heck this means to this quarter's earnings, et cetera? You've been in these roles. What are you thinking about? What are you spending your time doing? And what are the questions you think that are maybe more interesting as we move forward?
Yeah, well, I think that, what Trump did yesterday by suspending the tariffs, I think on the one hand can provide some clarity around what the next 90 days brings, particularly as we get into earnings season. We'll hear more from companies' earnings releases and how they're thinking about the future. So that could be helpful. It could also bring pause for some more concern. But he also I think, extended this period of uncertainty for another 90 days. And I'm not sure that's great for anybody. The one thing that I think about is how we're going to, what is the off-ramp for China? Because let's face it, that's a huge trading partner for us, as we all know. I do feel that they have the leverage here. They usually are longer thinkers than the U.S. They think in terms of decades versus quarters, as we do here in the West. While she is struggling with internal issues, I think with regard to growth and employment and property and markets and things like that, I think this actually helps him push his own agenda internally by becoming more self-sustaining, and I think it's a rallying cry for them internally. So, thirdly, I think it allows China to get a little closer to the European Union, which is something that I know they want to do. And they also have other non-tariff tools like import-export controls. I know they've talked about putting on some quotas around rare earth minerals and things like that. So I think that China has a leverage point here. And so I'm curious, as I'm sure you are, how does this resolve itself? Because I don't know, I don't see how it resolves itself. But at some point, you got to believe it does.
For sure. I mean, there's going to, if nothing else, time will pass, and there will be tariffs in place, or there won't, and we'll be reacting accordingly. The other thing that I think we don't fully understand yet is, at least at last glance, China was the largest holder of U.S. debt. If they decide to sell, I mean, we saw the bond market and some of the instability. China is into us as an importer, as an exporter. We as a U.S. based company, my company saw China as a big opportunity. Now, we sourced and had investments in China to service that, but certainly the idea of trading through was on our mind. Every time I went to China, I saw people sitting in the lounge talking about how they're sourcing their products over and selling them more globally. It'll be on everybody's mind. And we can talk about, we want to decrease our reliance on China. We're going to move X% of the production. Certainly the electronic guys have talked about this for a while, but it's still early days. It's not like, other than a couple companies where there's been wholesale shifts out of China, the dependence on one of the largest economies in the world and 1.3 billion people is going to be pretty high.
Yeah.
And they hold our debt. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays through. So you sat in this chair both on a finance and a supply chain side. What's going on in your mind as you're sitting in the chair? What are you having your people work on? This thing appears to be pretty mercurial. You don't want to all run to one side of the boat, because I think, to your point, a tweet changes and we could all run to the other side. So how do you sort of provide some stability and get people to keep their game faces on, as opposed to sitting around talking with each other, bemoaning their circumstances?
Yeah, no, I think this is a time. I think this is a time to be honest brokers, meaning improve your communications with your suppliers and your customers. And I think as we went through Trump 1.0, and then of course when we went through the inflationary environment from the pandemic, I think a lot of companies hone these processes. They spend time diversifying their supply base so that they were more resilient. They spend time talking to their customers and their suppliers to make sure they're very transparent. Because I think at the end of the day, this has got to, this is what I call it takes a village to solve, right? It's not you as a company that's going to, be able to protect your margins. You're going to have to rely on your suppliers to help you. And you're going to have to rely on your customers to also help you, in a sense that everyone's got to share a little bit of the burden. Because, the tariffs that are still in place aren't insignificant. We're still looking at 25% tariffs on autos and steel and aluminum, right? And even there's still some tariffs in place with Mexico and Canada. And so they're still there. And of course, China's, a huge tariff. So I think it's really important to maintain your communication links with your suppliers and your customers. But then I also think it's important to, what we did in our old company was spend a lot of time on how do we implement transparently pricing changes to the market. Because, it used to be, it would take us months to figure out what an increase in aluminum or steel would do to our pumps cost.
Right.
It took us a lot to map that. And so we spent a lot of time on figuring out how can we build resilient, dynamic models that can give us that very quickly. Secondly, it took us a long time to implement those price increases once we knew what they were by product, because our trading partners weren't used to price increases happening that quick. And so where it used to take months or quarters, we got it down to doing it within 2 weeks. And so what that allows us to do is when there were increases in our input costs, we were able to translate those with facts and communicate those to our supply base very quickly. And that allowed us to protect our margins. So I really think, as we're thinking about what we do, I think you may have said this on prior videos. I think it's a wait and see at this point in terms of structural change to your supply chain.
Sure.
Because we don't know where we're going, and you know better than anyone how long it takes to recreate new supply chains.
Right.
I mean, it's measured in maybe years, not months, or certainly not weeks, to do that kind of stuff. When you talk about building factories and relocating and requalifying suppliers, all this takes a lot of time. And in some cases, you've got to wonder, is the next administration going to have the same point of view as this administration? So are we going to change course in 3.5 years? It's unknown right now.
Yeah, I like that. I like that approach. And I think you're right. The best companies, whether it was driven by, we saw this in 2016 to 20, so you could sort of presuppose what might happen moving forward, or during the pandemic, you realized whatever supply chain you had wasn't resilient enough. The ability to sort of quickly assess, understand your risk, be able to answer those questions. If the board says, what's this going to cost us, or what's the sort of volume at risk, the profit at risk numbers, you should be able to tune that in. The best companies built that kind of capability to at least be able to understand, and then that will allow you to have an enterprise risk management discussion around how we're going to mitigate that risk. What are we willing to forego in terms of absolute profitability today to maintain longer, steady kinds of resilience over time? I think that's a really good point. I would tell you that a lot of companies I work with, that sounds really good, but they didn't build that capability. They survived the pandemic and then did a little bit of, glad that's over, or spent all their time trying to figure out how to do price inflation and to your point, pass it on as appropriate to the customers if they couldn't mitigate it. Indeed, I think that those capabilities, though, as we sit as leaders, those are the things we have to demand, because we're not going to be able to survive. This is one example of and we could say, well, this is such a disruption. Who could have thought of this? And the answer is anybody who's been in supply chain for the last 10 years. Pick your disruption.
Right.
Is it going to be weather? Is it going to be a hurricane? Is it going to be global trade changing? Is it going to be tariff structure? Is it going to be a global pandemic? These are the types of things we need to be able to invest in and understand. Whether or not we push the go button, I think is an interesting problem. One thing I probably wouldn't have done, but I think that I'd be talking about right now, though, is okay, we saw this coming. Did everybody sort of, let's buy materials ahead of the tariffs? Let's make sure while we have this window, we can get stuff in place, and so at least we can buy ourselves a quarter or a half a year of stability and line of sight to how we want to run our business. We've now been given another quarter, and so if you didn't react in the first 3 months of the administration, you better react and have some point of view on what you want to do right now. Well, and yes, to your point, tariffs aren't zero.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with you. I was thinking about that as well. Is that normally, if there was a tariff being put in place, um, under prior circumstances, it would have remained in place for some time. And I think, okay, you can go ahead and buy ahead if you want. You save yourself 90 days maybe.
Right.
But this seems to be an environment where that could happen every quarter. And
Right.
so when you're given, like you said, when you're given that opportunity, you may as well take advantage of that at this point.
Yeah, we become certainly we don't want to be speculating, and most public companies have got a lot of policies in place against it. But it's hard not to become a little bit of a day trader
Right.
as you if you see an opportunity, you might want to jump to it. And to your point, you need to build the commensurate business processes around it. You need to be able to analyze. You need to be able to pass those costs along if you can, understanding where your competition is to know if it allows you some flexibility. Those are the types of things that I think the best companies will do in this space. I know that you are on you're an advisor to an AI company, and obviously we've all learned a lot about AI and how to get better. Does AI have a role in this, or is this sort of the good old fashioned? We can crunch numbers, we can figure out sort of over the arc of time how to change our network. Do you think AI plays a role or can be an advantage for companies?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely think it can be. Now, the company that I'm involved with is computer vision, but let's take AI, AI more broadly. I
Yep.
mean, and I think with regard to supplier selection and the work that you do around qualifying, picking, choosing suppliers and understanding risk modeling and things like that, I think absolutely you could use AI to support that. And there's a lot of companies that are starting to do just that. My experience is that we're still in the very, very early innings, obviously, of AI. I think there's a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about it, but when at least my experience has been, a lot of companies aren't very far along in terms of understanding, what it can do, but more importantly, how it can solve their business problems and meet their business objectives in a
Yep.
systemic way, right? And so that's really got a long way to go, but I do think it's coming, absolutely coming. And I think with regard to, the pricing model I talked about earlier, you can certainly use AI to really ferret through the tons and tons of data that you need to really make that happen in a more more timely fashion. But I absolutely think there's a role to play with regard to resilience in the supply chain, no doubt.
I think then, and probably a discussion for a different time with you and I. Then I think we'll have the same sort of discussion on what sort of foundational. Do we have the right data governance? Do we have the right sort of things in place so we know that whatever we're having the data crunchers and the data machines kind of work through and crawl through, we feel good about the data it's using. We have processes in place to use it, and we've built a so what response that when AI tells us something, we have good enough relationship with our trading partners and with our commercial organization that we can do something about it.
Yeah.
That becomes the underlying part. We all have it's great. We have this great widget, but have we built in the so what factor, and can we action whatever it says we should do?
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think it's not the sexiest part of AI, but having data and standard data sets and data governance is really how you're going to leverage it, I think, throughout your company. And so it's absolutely a component that I think a lot of folks are figuring out, that there's a powerful tool here, but my data is all over the board. And that's the way it was in my prior companies. Very difficult to gather it because we had, we were built on a amalgamation of acquisitions. And you can imagine we had every different ERP system under the
Sure.
sun. It was like a rainbow. And so, getting all that harmonized is not an insignificant or a sexy task, as I said, but it's absolutely, we found it to be absolutely important.
Yeah, it is the hard work that you have to do to build the sort of resilience and capability you need to navigate these kinds of disruptions. We may not be changing our supply base overnight. We may not be moving and building a plant overnight, but understanding the implications of that and being able to get answers quickly is going to separate sort of the winners from the participators in this, and then lastly the victims in this sort of game of pinball we're playing as we watch in the news. Well,
Exactly.
Tony, it's so good to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for joining us. Hey, if you guys like this kind of content, you like this discussion, feel free and please hit the subscribe button. Let us know you like it. If instead you got some feedback, some questions, or you think we ought to be thinking about different things, we actually pay attention to the comments and want to understand if we're doing the right job by you. Please feel free to give us that feedback, and we'll adjust to the extent it makes sense. So thank you, everybody. Tony, thank you. Enjoy the rest
Thanks,
of your
John.
week, and look forward to talking again.
Take care.